Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Web Security Academy series. In today's video, we'll be covering lab number 10 in the cross-site scripting module titled DOM XSS in document.write_sync using source location.search inside a select element. If you do not have an account on the Web Security Academy, you can get one by visiting the URL portswigger.net/websecurity and clicking on the sign up button. I already have an account and I am logged in, so to access the exercise, I'm going to click on Academy, select all labs, do a search on cross-site scripting labs, and go to lab number 10 titled DOM XSS in document.write_sync using source location.search inside a select element. All right, let's get started. This lab contains a DOM-based cross-site scripting vulnerability in the stock checker functionality. It uses the JavaScript document.write function, which writes data out to the page. The document.write function is called with data from location.search, which you can control using the website URL. The data is enclosed within a select element. To solve this lab, perform a cross-site scripting attack that breaks out of the select element and calls the alert function. Alright, so the target goal over here is to exploit the DOM-based XSS in the stock checker functionality and call the alert function. Let's access the lab. Now notice over here, this is the built-in browser in Burp, and so all my requests are already being passed in my Burp proxy. When it comes to DOM-based XSS vulnerabilities, I don't really use the proxy. Instead, I use the developer tools in the browser to understand exactly where my input is going. And so for today, we're not going to be using the proxy, and instead, we're just going to use the browser. All right, the first step is to map the application and see if any of the parameters that are user controllable could potentially be vulnerable to XSS. So we're going to click on View Details right over here. Go down, you could see we've got a check stock feature that takes in a few options in terms of which city the store is in. So let's just keep it at London and then click on check stock. And we see over here we've got 790 units for this specific item at this specific store. So at first glance, this doesn't seem like it might be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. However, depending on how this is coded and if it uses client-side code, we might be able to exploit it in order to perform a DOM-based XSS exploit. So let's inspect on this one first. And that didn't work properly, so let's right-click and inspect. Okay, interesting. So we've got a select element over here that has name, store ID, and then it takes the options, London, Paris, and Milan. And I could see over here, we've got JS scripts, one to check the stock check.js, and then we've also got stock check payload.js. So this is interesting. My guess is there is some kind of client-side JavaScript that is responsible for these options right over here. So let's right-click and just view the entire page source and go down right over here. And here we go. So we've got some custom JavaScript over here that is responsible for the stock check form. Let's review that JavaScript and see if it could potentially be vulnerable. So over here, we've got a variable called stores. It takes in an array that has 3 values, London, Paris, and Milan, which is what we saw right over here. And then if we go back, we've got another variable called store. And if we scroll to the right, you could see over here, it looks like store is taken from the URL parameter that is called store ID. So this is interesting because if we go back over here, we didn't see this in the URL. We only saw product ID is equal to 1. However, based on this, it looks like you could set the store ID in the URL and then it will be saved over here in the select element. And then the rest of the options will be displayed for you. So this is interesting. If we add store ID right over here to test out that functionality, let's say Paris 2, hit enter, go down, and here we go. So we get the option Paris 2 pre-populated for us, and then we've got the options London, Paris, and Milan. All right, so this is interesting. That means we've got a user controllable parameter, which is in the URL, and then it writes to the DOM. So it writes to the page of the application, which means that this is likely vulnerable to DOM-based XSS if the application does not properly validate an encode input. So what we're going to do over here is enter a variable in store ID and hopefully be able to break out of the select element. So if we go back over here, this is the select element that it's creating. And then we've got the option selected, Paris2, and then option. So let's copy this if it allows us to copy it. And it does not. So essentially over here, whatever we put in the store ID parameter, so let's say Paris2, gets saved in the following manner. So we've got option, and then over here, we'd have option selected. All right, so the idea over here is we need to break out of the first select statement and then the option statement. So if we go over here, the way it's structured is select, name is equal to store ID, and then we've got a bunch of options, and then we end the select statement. So when I enter my payload right over here in store ID, it'll be entered in this string over here. So what I'm going to do is keep this string right over here and then just say angle bracket / select. So what'll happen over here is that the application will pre-populate this with an option. So it'll end it with an option tag. And then over here, this string will end the select element right over here. And then I could add my payload right over here. So my payload would be, let's say, an image element. The source could be anything, let's say 1. And when it doesn't find that source, it'll error out. And on error, I want it to alert 1. And that's pretty much it. So let's copy this. This is our payload. Put it in here and then put it in our store ID. Hit enter. And we get presented with the alert box. Click OK. And we should see the congratulations, you solved the lab message. Let's hit enter again. Okay, and we see the congratulations, you solved the lab message. Now, if we go look at the source code over here to see how it was formatted, you could see over here we've got the select name, store ID, and then we've got our option Paris2, which I said it will close that option selected tag for us. And then we closed off this select over here. And then we added our image tag, which errors out. And then on error, it'll alert 1. And then we've got the rest of the options. And that's pretty much it. So we successfully completed the exercise by exploiting the DOM-based XSS vulnerability. In the next lab, we'll look at another case of a cross-site scripting vulnerability.